Do you ever notice that there seems to be a lot of Christians that talk like they 100% know what God thinks about divorce and remarriage? But the truth is, probably very few of them actually understand or know the context of the very scriptures they quote. Well, that's what we're going to dive into in this episode. Stick around. I think you're going to like this one. We're the Journey Church Online. This is episode 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. In this episode, we're going to be looking at what Jesus said about divorce in the Sermon on the Mount. It's a passage that many Christians cite. Even pastors cite this when they advise people about divorce. But before we dig into the passage, I want to make sure you've got some context. Long before Jesus, God's people were surrounded by the pagan cultures of their times. These cultures treated women as property with really no more rights than livestock in most cases. And because of this, the people of God often treated the Israelite women in the same ways. But God gave some unique instructions to his people regarding divorce. Instructions that were a radical shift away from the way that the pagans treated women. Instructions that created protections for and provisions for divorced women. Something that was really revolutionary in their time. Well, Deuteronomy chapter 24 verses 1 through 4 is a big deal in regard to the treatment of women. Especially in the ancient world. As you may know, the ancient world was not always kind to women. In many cultures surrounding the Israelites, men were allowed to abuse women, especially their wives. However, God was concerned with protecting women and ensuring that they were not mistreated. This is demonstrated in the protective statutes in the Old Testament, including the one in Deuteronomy chapter 24. This command was given to protect divorced women in Israel and provide them with the right to remarriage. It acknowledges that divorce was a cultural practice at the time and provides clear legal authorization for a divorced woman to remarry. The only prohibition in that text is against the first husband taking the divorced woman back in the event of her divorce from her second husband, or if her second husband was to die. Here's the thing, this text is not about defining the conditions for divorce and remarriage. Its main focus is to prohibit the remarriage of the original couple after a divorce and remarriage. Some people have argued that divorced persons are still considered married in the eyes of God, but this is not true. Divorced persons are divorced in the eyes of God, and what God has separated, no man should claim to be joined. In light of this text, it is wrong to urge remarried people to divorce their current partners and return to a prior spouse. Divorce is not a corrective measure for divorce. And those whom God has joined together, let no one separate. Here's the thing, it may shock you to know that many pastors and church leaders have told remarried people that they're living in sin and committing adultery in their new marriage. They then advise these people to divorce their current spouse and go back and remarry their first spouse. What if their first spouse is also remarried? Well, then they are supposed to be divorced as well. It is no wonder people have been hurt so badly by the church when crazy advice like this is far too common. My wife, Kaila, was married for a short time when she was younger, and unfortunately it ended in divorce. Years later, after she had grown as a Christian and began really taking her faith seriously, she went to ask a pastor about getting remarried someday in the future. She had nobody in mind, she just wanted to learn about what the guidelines were as she was growing as a Christian. And she was told that her only option was to remarry her original husband, and that if she married anyone else, she was doomed to a life of sin. Well, knowing that wasn't an option, she left that meeting feeling condemned to a life of singleness and alone, wondering, why would God punish me for divorcing a man who checked out and left? For the record, that was bad advice from that pastor, and God didn't set aside divorce and troubled marriages as the end-all unforgivable sin. The Deuteronomy 4 text mentions a man who wants to divorce his wife for any reason. Well, this was meant to protect her from being exploited by an unfair man. In those days, women were often abused and exploited in this male-dominated culture. Women could be married, divorced, and then reclaimed if they happened to inherit some money or build a strong economic base or secure some property, including children from a later marriage to a different husband. But Deuteronomy 24 sought to give women in the community of Israel a status that would prevent that kind of cruelty. The law of the divorce certificate in Deuteronomy 24 marked a major difference between God's laws and other ancient Near Eastern laws. It provided a proper way to end a broken marriage and set women free to remarry without the fear of future claims from their former husbands. The regulation required a legitimate reason for divorce, which would have to be brought before a public official and documented with a legal document. The man was also required to return all or part of the dowry to the wife. And although originally this was seen as the husband's right to divorce, the rabbis eventually allowed women to sue for divorce under certain circumstances. Fast forward hundreds of years later, and what God gave as a way to protect marginalized women has just become commonplace. God's people had become so accustomed to using and abusing the laws that they had really lost touch with the heart of God and His intent in actually giving them these laws. And the law that Moses gave in order to allow for a certificate of divorce was intended to protect women from being taken advantage of. But now, all these years later, men had taken it to a new extreme. Now they use this law as an excuse to divorce women for nearly any reason. All you had to do was issue her a certificate of divorce and you were free of her and on to the next wife. Well, along comes Jesus, and He's drawing people back to the heart of the Father, reminding them of His truth and His best plans for His people. Well, Jesus says that a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice of divorce. But He said that you've heard that the law says a man who divorces his wife, unless she has been unfaithful, causes her to commit adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. So we see what He says in Matthew chapter 5, 31 and 32. Jesus is speaking correction over them. The pendulum had swung too far in the other way, and God's people had gotten too comfortable with divorce. And so Jesus calls them back to God's original heart for marriage. Can a marriage fall apart? Absolutely, we all know that. But what is God's best plan? Stay married. Don't just divorce your wife because you don't like this or that about her, or whatever your reason might be. You see, Jesus reminds these men that unless there's been infidelity, cheating, then your reason for divorce is probably not on solid ground. Well, then there's that last part where Jesus says that anybody who marries a divorced woman causes her to commit adultery. That sentence by itself, if you take it out of context, which has been done so many times, has been used to control and shame countless people that it was never intended to apply to. The sentence is given in the context of Jesus warning these men that they are not to frivolously divorce and cast out their wives unless she's been unfaithful with another man. And he warned them that if they just divorce their wife for some lame reason, that they're putting her in a terrible spot of being with another man. It's like, listen guys, none of you would ever want your wife to cheat on you. But what you're doing is putting her in a spot where you kick her out and her only means of survival is to be with another man. Well, lastly, I want to say this. Nowhere does Jesus ever give anyone the idea that a divorce of any kind is meant to cast you out of fellowship or excommunicate you, as they say in some places. That was never the intent, to be kicked out of your church or kicked out of your family. Very often, divorce is complicated. There may be issues of physical or emotional abuse and control. There may be adultery. There may simply be one partner unwilling to try, unwilling to work at it and stick with it. And even if the other person wants to stay faithful and try, it just doesn't work. People are broken. They're hurt. People struggle with sin and selfishness. And the truth is, we all make mistakes. The broken, selfish, hurt, messed up people were the very people that Jesus left the 99 to go and find, to call them back to him, not to cast them away, instead to eat with them, not to ignore them, but to love them, not to leave them high and dry on their own when they need him most. If you've ever been cast out by your family or a church because of a divorce, listen, please hear me. I don't know how to say this any other nice way. That's stupid. That's not Jesus. And I just want you to know, we're sorry. Reach out to us. You're welcome here. You're wanted here and you're invited home. All right, we're all set for some more exciting exploration. This ride in here, mountain biking, has so much to offer. We couldn't possibly cover it all in this episode. So don't miss the opportunity to watch the full adventure up in here and some of the other things that we check out on beyond this lake. You're gonna see a link pop up in your screen. Just click on that and watch the full experience. And by the way, if you didn't see last week's episode about adultery, you're in for a treat. Not because it was about adultery, that's a tough subject, but it's an important lesson. But we also filmed it in one of the most breathtaking places we have ever gone. Picture this, standing on a razor-thin rock edge, nestled right between on this cliff, between two rivers in this epic, awe-inspiring canyon. If you missed it, no worries. The links to that and the next video are gonna appear on the screen in just a second. So I'm out of here. We're gonna keep the adventure going.